Welcome, welcome. Happy Friday. Thank you so much for joining us for this second session, session 2 of the Art of Effective Management. And we're almost right at the top of the hour, so I'll give everybody about a minute or so before we jump in. But grab your coffee, grab your tea, whatever makes your Friday, and definitely buckle up. We have a pretty exciting session today, and I hope you get some great takeaways that you can take out and apply right away. So we'll get started in just about a minute. And just as a reminder, we are streaming live on YouTube. So just in case there's ever a day that you cannot make it, we definitely make that available to you as long as you register and have a ticket with us for these webinar series. All right, well, we're at 9:59, so I guess it's okay to kind of roll into this Friday morning. So the art of effective management, as we mentioned and framed in session 1, is really understanding the functions of management and what it looks like to succeed within management, but also be realized. And when I say be realized, I mean really, really live out the role of what management is supposed to be. And so we explore those each time we go through each of these webinars. And so with that said, I'll go ahead and introduce myself just in case you've never met me, either virtually or live and in person. I'm Dr. Myra Austin. I'm the CEO and founder of Management Cues, and I'm always super excited and happy to do these webinar sessions. They're fun, and I hope that you have some valuable takeaways of what we learn as we work with clients, and as I share my 20 plus year experience of what I've learned about managers. So who is Management Cues? So our company is unique. We do provide training in leadership and management areas, but that's not what makes us different. What makes us different is that we're backed by neuroscience, and our approach, our methodology, and the frameworks we used have been scientifically tested. And the reason I had them tested was because I wanted to make sure that we weren't wasting people's time and that they were learning and that we were really capturing the manager's experience. So, for whatever reason, I'm completely obsessed with what managers go through, what they love, what they hate, what works, what doesn't. And what happens to their teams because of it. And so that's how all of this came to be in terms of management cues. And so our approach is largely experiential. We focus on the experience that managers are having. And so with that said, that's a little bit about who we are, what we do, why we're different. Today, we're going to cover planning as a function in management. And each week, we're going to cover it the same way. We're going to do an overview. We'll break down the topic. We'll capture some great takeaways. We'll share some resources that you can take advantage of, and then we'll close out. All right. So make sure that if you have questions or feedback or want to share something, please do so in the chat. Raise your hand or unmute. I'm happy to engage with all of you and listen your side of the story as you hear these things unravel each week. All right. So here we go. So, planning, like we shared in week 1, is one of the 5 core functions of management, meaning that it's a necessary reality if you're going to be a successful and effective manager. So, as a management function, planning focuses on setting clear objectives and being intentional in choosing what to do and what not to do. And it's necessary in order to fully realize that function. And so sometimes we focus too much on one end and not the other. And so today we're going to take a look at the whole picture. Effective planning really requires managers to be strong decision makers. So when we tiptoe, when we're nervous, when we're not confident, typically we're not fully executing that planning function, and there's a consequence to that. So you have to be able to assess situations in real time and apply the right level and type of planning for each workplace scenario. Now, that's summarized in that sentence, but that's a lot of balancing. That's a lot of real time decision making. That's a lot of threat response, right? There's all these things that happen to managers when they're executing, which is one of the reasons I find it fascinating, because I don't think management as a role necessarily gets all the credit that it deserves with everything that we handle in that role. So, what does it look like when you're planning effectively and you're in mode? Well, when you're planning effectively, you're establishing the department goals, which means there's clarity around that, you know what they are, and your communication with leadership is clear and transparent and open, right? So, sometimes there's a gap there. It means you're identifying the resources that you're going to need in order to be successful in executing whatever plan you have. And so the gap that I've seen there is that sometimes managers aren't fully aware of what exactly they have access to, what exactly they can make decisions around, where the boundaries are. Those are all examples of things that I've seen both in practice and in training with clients that usually make the planning function difficult for managers. And so we're talking about theory versus practice, right? And as a tactician and operations leader who really focuses on how realistic is this, that's where I see some gaps. And then number three, it's creating goals that are related to the tasks that your team members are doing. So sometimes we're so busy executing tasks, we don't necessarily design goals around them. And that is a miss from an organizational standpoint because that's where we miss that alignment piece when it comes to planning. And number four, establishing evaluation methods to monitor, plan, and progress. So as managers, we're on the front line. And a big part of our role is making sure things get done. The challenge there is it's not the only thing we're responsible for. We're also responsible for progress, for growth, for impact. And when we don't have enough training around that or support, that kind of goes to the wayside. And that's where planning starts to fail. So let's take a deeper dive. So, planning on its own sounds easy, but there are actually different types of planning that managers engage with or disengage with, or sometimes aren't even aware is a thing. And so I run into that quite a bit in training, actually, at different levels of management. So there are three planning types that all managers should really be aware of. They might not be involved 100% with all three because it may not be in line with their role or stage that they're in, but they should have awareness. So in management, planning shows up in three areas. It shows up as strategic planning, which is typically setting long-term direction and priorities. It shows up as operational planning, which is translating strategy into systems and process. And lastly, it shows up in tactical planning, making day to day decisions that move work forward. So, what I have found interesting in observation is a lot of entry and middle managers get stuck in tactical planning and they don't really see themselves in an operational planning capacity, and they definitely don't see themselves or are involved in a strategic planning capacity. So that awareness limits their impact, or that lack of awareness. So let's take even a deeper dive. So I designed this infographic about 2 years ago, and I did it to simplify and break this out in a way that was easy to digest. So let's look at strategic planning. So, strategic planning is when you're focusing on why we need a solution for the company or the department, even. It's a focus on when the solution is needed, right? So, it's time sensitive. And there's typically the C suite and directors that are very commonly involved in this strategic planning bucket, which is why entry level and mid level managers aren't typically involved. But we should be coaching them and training them and teaching them so that there's an awareness that starts to grow. And it's intended for long term type of direction. Let's look at operational planning, which is honestly my favorite type of planning. So, operational planning focuses on what's happening across business units between departments, right? It's kind of a mid-level type of planning. And it typically involves the technical teams, staff or project managers, the operational teams, right? These are the teams that are creating the flow, are creating systems and process. And it's intended for a mid to short term direction depending on what you're working on. Now, the tactical planning, which is where I've personally seen most managers spend the bulk of their time and have the most awareness around, is focusing on where the plan will take place, the details, right, of what's happening right now. It's typically involving managers, coordinators, kind of more entry level type of staff. And it is definitely focused on the here and now, the short term, right? So the short term type of support, and it aims for that short term direction. So I think a good question for us to ask is, am I fully aware of my role within strategic planning and operational planning? Which am I the strongest with, and why or why not am I not involved in these areas? Because that's where our management impact lies. So there's a little bit there in terms of those three different types of planning. All right, so let's keep going as we explore this planning function. So the other thing that came up actually in training and came up as a common question with our clients was, now that we know these three different planning types and that we should have some awareness around them as managers, what about the timelines, right? What about the direction? And so I broke those down a little bit further. So for strategic planning, it typically takes place quarterly, yearly, or when there's a business need that's creating a need for a pivot, right? That's typically where strategic planning kind of rears its head. And the direction is that it's intended to help provide direction a little bit longer, for maybe a year or 5 years, right? It's kind of our North Star. And operational planning takes place routinely. It takes place all the time, in increments of sometimes daily, weekly, monthly. It kind of lives in our environment, very much an operations type of function. But it requires all managers to be involved and have an awareness around it. And it's intended to help provide midterm direction for a period of months or quarters. And then, of course, tactical planning, which is more the day to day, typically project based when you're trying to get something done, meet KPIs. There's a lot of tactical planning around that. And it's intended to help provide direction for team members in real time. So that's the time bound component to these things. And so knowing that that's how it's supposed to kind of flow helps us be a higher impact within the planning function as managers. So when does planning become, go from a checkbox to an impactful thing for managers? Well, that only happens when there's this higher level of awareness and managers start to demonstrate mastery, right? A real awareness and practice, and application around planning as a function. And so that means that managers are recognizing which planning type is appropriate for the situation. So, for example, if you didn't realize that there were these three types of planning that managers should have at least awareness around, then that's where you start to gain mastery once you start to open up that kind of lens. It's when you start to communicate plans effectively across organizational levels, which means up and down and all around, right? It's when you're connecting day-to-day plans to the long-term strategic goals. And to me, that looks like being able to explain it clearly to your team members. I know that in my experience, I've heard and I've seen it, right? Where managers will say, I don't even know why we're doing this anymore, or I don't even know why this matters. So if you've ever heard that phrase, there's typically a disconnect. And sometimes we're playing into it. And so that's where there's that gap of taking that planning function from a checkbox to mastery. So the role of the manager. So the role of the manager is so important. We're the gatekeepers. We are the linchpins in an organization. And so awareness around this function really is monumental. So planning is foundational to management. It's part of us being successful in our roles. And so what it does though to others when we when we plan very well intentionally and have this self-awareness, we actually reduce the cognitive load and uncertainty. So that's what happens on the opposite end with our team members when we're executing successfully. So if you're not familiar with what cognitive load is, it's the effort to learn something, the effort to apply something, right? So we reduce that for our team members, which makes it easier to do, but easier to achieve. It's aligning clear plans so that departments and functions are supporting focus, predictability, and coordinated action. So this becomes an outcome of effective planning. When a manager clearly communicates mission, objectives, and methods, employees can allocate their attention and effort effectively, right? And these are neuroscience backed components that we integrate into our training and our approach because it has such it has such a significant result that you can't ignore it once you're aware that that's what it does. And clarity and expectations supports decision making, performance, and stress regulation, which if you're looking at any of the trending reports in business right now, people are very burnt out. And there's a high degree of stress for so many external factors that the manager's role then becomes even more important if there's awareness around that, right? Because you're enabling stress regulation. Predictability actually reduces threat response and creates psychological safety. So there's all these things that we have the power to do in an environment as managers. And I don't think we're ever quite shown the path, right? Or given enough credit for it. So why managers need to know how to plan. So from a functional standpoint, and a tactical standpoint, we need to know how to plan well to allocate resources effectively, right? That's the benefit to the business. That's how we become an asset. By committing time, talent, and budgeting towards clearly defined goals. And you want to anticipate future challenges and opportunities. And so managers can take a proactive and informed action. And again, creating that kind of regulation and stability in others. So here's the neuroscience lens. And I think this is important. For me, this is what created the aha manager moment when I started to understand and test what we were doing with their neuroengineers and neuroscientists. Planning reduces uncertainty and it supports the executive function in the prefrontal cortex, which means that people, including ourselves, can make stronger, better decisions. And that is an immediate return on investment on your role, right? And what you're doing. That speaks to your impact when you're able to recognize that. Clear plans reduce that effort in learning and making decisions and executing that cognitive load that I mentioned. And it allows you to align attention and effort, right? There's a lot of disengagement in the workforce. There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of even maybe defiance or over reliance on certain things, and it becomes an issue when we're not aware of what's causing it or that we can actually redirect it and have the power to do it. So anticipating future scenarios becomes easier because things are a little bit more psychologically safe, and proactive planning actually strengthens the way that people learn around you, and in your own learning curve also shortens. So those are all things that effective planning does. So let's break these down further so that we can really understand its impact. So when we reduce uncertainty through planning, we are lowering the brain's threat response. So when there's uncertainty and there isn't predictability, we actually activate the threat response in others. So when outcomes feel unclear, what ends up happening is the amygdala becomes more active, and that is what is increasing stress. So if you've ever been in a situation where your leader or the person who is supposed to have the answers doesn't have any of the answers, and you start to feel incredibly frustrated, sometimes even angry, right? That's what's happening. So clear plans create that predictability, allowing the brain to shift from threat mode to safe mode. And we're completely, as managers, in charge of that. So supporting the executive function, right? This really speaks to really great decision making. Planning reduces uncertainty, which lowers that brain's threat response, and it gives structure to organize information and make those higher quality decisions. So I don't know about you, but I've been in rooms where I think myself, like, why was that decision made? Right? That's a really dumb decision. So I think that sometimes we don't realize that we're kind of pouring into that bucket because certain things aren't taking place the way that they should. So reducing cognitive load. So the structure that we provide through our effective planning helps us organize that information for higher quality decisions. And then it actually frees up the mental energy for problem solving and execution. It allows us to get creative and have fun with it, at least the brain's definition of fun, right? We may not realize that that's what's happening, but making it easier for the brain to make higher quality decisions, that changes the effectiveness of your team and the effort that we as managers have to put into something. If you find yourself as a manager saying, I'm just going to do it because they're not doing it right, maybe the focus has to be on reducing cognitive load and be more effective in planning, right? To get that kind of the outcome that you need to make your job easier. So aligning attention and effort, the brain follows what feels important. And I think what's interesting about that is you can't force it. You can't pretend. You can't fake it till you make it. The brain knows and the brain responds accordingly, right? And that's true of your team members, right? So planning helps employees know where to focus their attention, preventing scattered effort and decision fatigue. When there's too much of a switch up going on between what information people are receiving, they get mentally tired. And so they either tune you out or they don't follow through or they make poor decisions based on how that planning presented itself. And set that situation up, right? Psychological safety, such a popular term this year. So here's the thing. I like to take theory and go into tactics and give you some real stuff to try, right? As soon as you're done listening to the session. When managers plan for potential issues and opportunities, employees experience greater stability and trust. Okay, so planning is actually helping you create psychological safety without you even telling people that's what you're doing, without you even training them around it, right? It's you're actually putting it into effect. And this supports emotional regulation and sustained performance. And I can tell you that when I learned this and understood this, I was more intentional with my planning because I realized that it was that important. So, strengthening learning and adaptability. Anticipating scenarios allows the brain to rehearse responses, making it easier to adapt when change occurs, supporting neuroplasticity over reactivity. So, sometimes we're wondering why people are so reactive in an environment, right? And we're not realizing that we're actually nurturing the environment to be that way, and we haven't done anything otherwise. We haven't done anything else to counteract that. So understanding neuroplasticity actually becomes pretty important. So here's what it is, right? If you've never heard of it, if you've never been trained on it, here's what it is. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change, adapt, and rewire itself over time. Okay. And everybody has this, right? It's not a special gift. This is a humanity thing. This is a physical thing, a biological thing, right? It's based on experience, learning, behavior, and environment. And so, because as managers, we're the gatekeepers, because as managers, we're the linchpins, because as managers, we either activate the threat response or create psychological safety, because all of that is true, we have a key role to play when it comes to creating neuroplasticity in our environment. And again, planning is a way to get there. So here are some common barriers to planning. So I've been managing for over 20 years, been obsessed with management and the manager's experience, as I shared at the beginning. Here's what I've seen and what I've learned. And feel free to disagree or add anything in chat. I love to hear from you guys. Managers don't know how to plan. They've never been taught how to do it right or how to do it at the 3 different levels, right? Operationally, strategically, and from a tactic standpoint. They just get thrown in there and they figure it out, right? That's been what I've seen. Managers don't receive crisis planning protocols, right? And so then crisis planning becomes inevitable and they get wrapped up in trying to fix it reactively. They don't feel they have time to plan, has been such a common theme, right? I don't have time to plan. But here's the reality, right? Planning is part of the job. It's part of the role being done effectively. So if you're not planning, you're not doing your job effectively, right? And so there's this mind shift that needs to happen around that. Managers have gotten by, right? They've just stayed in the same role or gotten promoted anyway, without any real planning in their careers as a function, because leadership doesn't realize this is what's holding their organization back, or because training isn't adequate, or because that's the way it has always been culturally in an organization, right? And so making that distinction, separating yourself from that, it takes self-awareness, right? Managers don't have a system around how they should be doing this, and they lack the discipline. Again, if it's not trained, if it's not a requirement, it takes somebody who really cares about being effective and successful to step out of that comfort zone and seek it out, right? But it makes all the difference. And so those have been some common barriers. If there are any other barriers I missed, please share them in chat. I always like to learn from you as much as hopefully you learn from me. So here's a checklist. And if I were to take a screenshot of anything, it would be this one, right? So here's what it looks like when we're planning strategically. And we're taking part in data informed planning, right? So this checklist is just a framework for you to take and actually use. You could use it today if you wanted, but you want to translate organizational strategy into 2 to 3 team priorities that directly support the company's goals, the enterprise goals. You want to define success metrics up front for performance, quality, engagement, time, and cost before choosing how to proceed. You want to analyze leading and lagging indicators to identify where manager intervention will have the greatest impact, right? And this is you developing an enterprise lens, a lens that's not just about the area that you manage, but how everything is connected. You want to prioritize initiatives based on capacity, risk, and return, not the volume of work. Managers tend to emphasize on the output and leave it there, right? Just how much you put out, how much you get done. And your value is so much more than that. Allocate resources intentionally by matching skills, workload, and decision authority to each priority. And break strategy into sequence sections or actions and decision points, not one-time plans, right? So understand how it connects long-term. And assign clear ownership and escalation paths to prevent bottlenecks and diffusion of responsibility. And establish review cycles to assess progress, remove barriers, and calibrate plans. Adjust tactics in real time based on data trends, feedback, and environmental changes. And you don't have to do all of these at once, right? But you could start to begin to get more strategic with one area at a time and incorporate it and take a look at what comes out of it, right? Learn from strategic application. So when does management planning fail? So this is what it looks like when it's not working. So if you're experiencing this in your environment, it's probably because the planning function isn't being exercised or executed appropriately. So when managers are leading without listening to the feedback from their teams or colleagues, managers start with the future in mind and ignore the past, right? So we're kind of moving forward. We're not learning from what's happening. Managers are asking the wrong questions. Managers focus on complexity versus simplicity. And managers are launching objectives without buy-in. They're just moving, they're kind of bulldozing, right? They're bulldozing through trying to get things done. And the focus is getting things done, not getting things aligned. And managers create goals and objectives without clear metrics. One thing that I've seen with that be common is KPIs are handed down and managers never push back as to whether those KPIs actually make sense, and they have all the insight. So just make sure that it's very clear how things connect when it comes to KPIs or OKRs. And managers disregard the function of planning. They just don't utilize the function enough in the execution of their role. And so here's one of the quotes that really sticks out to me in terms of planning. Planning is deciding in the present what to do in the future. It is the process whereby companies reconcile their resources with their objectives and opportunities. So holistically, if we're planning successfully, we're looking at what we have, what we need to do, and what the potential is. And so as managers, when we're not doing that within the area we're supposed to be managing, we're leaving impact on the table. And we're also probably not providing the support that we should be providing to our teams. So here are our key takeaways for today. Okay, so 1, planning reduces uncertainty and improves decision quality. So clear plans lower cognitive load, allowing managers and teams to shift from reactive behavior to focused execution. 2, Effective planning connects daily actions to organizational strategy. Managers translate high-level goals into specific priorities that guide consistent decision-making at every level. Number 3, data-informed planning drives better resource allocation using the right data that helps managers deploy on time, incorporating their talent, and making sure that you're paying attention to the right thing to get the greatest impact. And number 4, planning clarifies expectations and enables accountability. When goals, roles, and success measures are clear, teams perform with greater confidence and alignment. And number 5, planning is an ongoing management practice, not a one-time event. So this should be part of our muscle, and we should be exercising it daily. Strong managers continuously review, adjust, and recalibrate plans as conditions, data, and needs change. It honestly becomes something that you flex and that you get really comfortable with, but we don't get super comfortable with it unless we're practicing and have self-awareness around it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and open it up to any Q&A if anybody has any questions, and I'll go ahead and take a look at our YouTube stream to see if there are any chat or questions there, and if not, I'll go ahead and lead us towards the close. Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good to move forward. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at any time. But training, support, and resources. So you'll get a copy of this webinar deck. You'll get access to the session recording in case you want to share it or listen to it again while you're driving. And we, of course, as we shared at the beginning, provide training programs that are scientifically proven to work. You can check those out through our hyperlinks. We have our management planner that covers all of the functions of management and the functions of leadership, which we have on our website. And if you want to nerd out and learn a little bit more about our neuroscience studies that were conducted in 2024, they're linked here and accessible on our website. And if you want to meet with me for a one-on-one consultation, I'm more than happy to do that. And you can have access to that. Last and not least, we have membership programs too, super accessible. They're available to individual managers who want monthly support, or entire management teams, executive leaders, and now, as of late, also for our nonprofit folks, we created special programming. We have a special 30% off discount for any of our programs from now until January 31st. And so if you have any questions about any of that, please feel free to reach out, and we look forward to supporting your success. So the art of effective management, our next session is going to focus on organization and being impactful through that function, structuring teams and workflows for maximum efficiency. So I'll meet you next Friday. I hope you'll join us for session number 3. And with that said, thank you so much for joining on this Friday. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.